Hey, welcome. So your Ford's check engine light is on, you plugged in the scanner, and it spit out this weird code, P0332. Well, don't worry, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down what that code really means and figure out what your car is trying to tell you.
Seeing that little orange engine light pop up can be a bit stressful. But really, all it is your car trying to have a conversation with you. And that code, P0332, it's just one very specific message. By the time we're done here, you'll know exactly what it's saying. So, let's get into it.
All right, first things first. Before we can even think about fixing anything, we've got to understand what the code is actually saying. It has a super official, kind of technical sounding name, but I promise you, it's not nearly as complicated as it sounds. Okay, let's break this down piece by piece. Knock sensor 2 tells us we're dealing with a specific sensor. Bank 2 just tells us what side of the engine to look at. See, on a V engine, you have two banks of cylinders, and bank 2 is usually the side opposite cylinder number 1. But the real key, the most important part, is those last two words, circuit low. Right there, that tells us this is an electrical problem. It's all about the voltage. So here's the bottom line. Your car's main computer is always listening, right? And it's expecting a very specific voltage signal from this sensor. When that voltage suddenly drops way too low or just disappears entirely, the computer goes, whoa, something's not right here, and it flags an error. And that's what triggers the check engine light on your dash with our code P0332. So we know the issue is with the knock sensor's circuit, but what does this thing even do? Why should you care? Well, because if you ignore it, it can really mess with your fuel economy, and down the road, it could even lead to some pretty serious engine damage. So, what exactly is it listening for? The best way to think about this sensor is like a tiny little microphone, or maybe a doctor's stethoscope, pressed right up against your engine block. Its only job all day long is to listen for a very specific and very unhealthy vibration that we call engine knock. This stuff can really hurt an engine over time, so that little sensor is basically your engine's first line of defense. And how it works is actually pretty cool. As your engine revs up and down, the sensor physically feels those vibrations and turns them into a tiny electrical voltage signal. The stronger the vibration, the higher the voltage. It then shoots that signal straight to the car's brain, the main computer, which can then make instant, tiny adjustments to keep the engine running smoothly and safely. Okay, so the code says circuit low, which means we're on the hunt for an electrical issue. And when it comes to the P0332 code, there are really two main suspects that we're going to be looking for. So on one hand, you could have what's called a circuit open, and that is exactly what it sounds like. There's a break somewhere. Think of it like a cut wire. The signal just can't get from point A to point B. Then you have a short to ground. This is more like a leak. The electricity is taking a shortcut it's not supposed to, draining away before it gets where it needs to go, which makes the voltage reading drop. So what actually causes these things in the real world? Well, it could be a connector that's just gotten dirty or corroded over the years. It could be that the knock sensor itself has just given up. But a lot of the time, we're looking at a damaged wire. And yes, sometimes that damage is because a squirrel or a mouse decided your engine bay looked like a great place to have a snack. Okay, so we know what the code is and we know who the usual suspects are. Now for the really important part. How do you actually figure out what's wrong? Let's walk through a simple troubleshooting checklist. You can see that the fix is directly tied to the problem. If you have an open circuit, well, your job is to find that break and fix it. If the wire is all chewed up, it needs to be replaced. If there's a short, you have to find where the signal is leaking out. And hey, sometimes you get lucky, and it's just a loose connection or some gunk on the connector that you can clean up and tighten. So here's your game plan. First, you might need to drive the car around for a bit to make sure the code is active. Then, pop the hood and just start with your eyes. You don't need any fancy tools yet. Follow the wire from the sensor. Are there any obvious breaks, frayed spots, or melted plastic? Wiggle the connectors. Are they snug? Do you see any of that crusty green or white corrosion? If you look at that whole circuit and it looks absolutely perfect, then you can start thinking that maybe the sensor itself is the problem. So let's just boil this all down, shall we? P0332 means there's a low voltage problem with knock sensor number 2. The most common cause, more often than not, is an issue with the wiring or the connectors. That's why you always start with a simple visual inspection. It's the easiest thing to do and could solve the whole mystery right there. Only after you've ruled out the wiring should you start thinking about replacing the sensor itself. So look, you're no longer just staring at some random light on your dashboard.
You know what the message means, you know the most likely causes, and now you have a clear plan to figure it out. So, the only question left is, are you ready to pop the hood and take a look?